So for part 3, we're looking at the introduction. And my assumption, if you're watching this video, is that you have written or drafted your 2 paragraphs. Okay, so they're already done and there's a really clear teal structure for each of them. Okay, I should be able to see that really clearly, and you've taken on the feedback from your previous assignments and you've made sure that you've corrected those mistakes, that you understand teal really well. Creating an introduction. So the purpose of the introduction is really to tell us what the content of the essay is going to be. All right. I've got this line here, but it's important to think about an essay is not a mystery novel. You don't want to keep your reader in suspense. You want to be really clear about what you're going to talk about. Okay, you need to be clear and predictable. It's all about clarity. Okay, that's what makes a good essay. So with that in mind, there's 3 sections that we're going to use to create an effective introduction. So the first section is really about showing our audience what we're talking about in general. So in this case, the broad focus of the text is on poetry. At the moment in English, I'm studying poetry. That's what this is about. If you're not interested in poetry, you shouldn't read this essay. That's basically what you want to say. You can see some of the other titles below, like it could be novels or film or poetry, So if I was doing this about a film, my first sentence might be, film is a dynamic way of presenting stories visually, or, something like that. But in this case, the focus is on poetry. So I want to start by writing at least one sentence which sort of just introduces the idea of what poetry is and what it's all about. Okay, so I've just created this sentence. Poetry is a form of writing which allows people to communicate complex ideas and emotions. Okay, I could have talked about how poetry is an art form. I could have talked about how it's a form of expression. I could have talked about how it manipulates language. It doesn't really matter what I say. I kind of just want to introduce my reader to this idea that this is about poetry. Okay, our focus is poetry. The second section of the introduction is in the fact that, I've started really broadly by saying, look, this is about poetry. Now I want to make it clear that this is about a particular poem. So now's the point where I introduce my specific poem. Okay, so in this case, I've done It's Like I'm Blindfolded by Anthony Pittman. I want to make it really clear what the topic of the essay is. So what have I actually been asked to do? Because that's such an important point about what the rest of the essay is going to be about. So for this assignment, the topic is what are the intended messages of the poem. So what you're going to see in my example is that I mentioned the name of the poem and I mixed that up to include the topic of the essay. Okay, so my example says Anthony Pittman's poem, It's Like I'm Blindfolded, conveys multiple themes within its text, designed to promote intended messages to the audience. Okay, so notice I've made the point of, I've said poem, I've said intended messages, like the language of the topic are in that sentence. I've kind of drawn it all together. The third section is where I'm going to be really specific. Okay, so notice how I started quite broad and then I became a little bit more specific, and now I'm being really specific. Okay, I'm saying exactly what paragraph you're going to read in this. Like, here's the real guts of the content. So I want to give a clear outline of what you will achieve in this essay and the order that the information will occur. Okay, so you'll notice there's subtle things in here, like which theme I say first or which technique I say first corresponds with whatever I talk about first in the essay. Little things like that just ease with the clarity and communication. The first thing is going to show how the poet, like my first paragraph is going to show how the poet uses metaphor to promote the theme of losing innocence. Okay, the second paragraph will show how personification is used to promote the theme of being seen as a failure. Now, I could just say that, I guess, but it would sound a bit repetitive and robotic. So I want this to come out clearly in my final section so that the reader knows exactly what to expect. So you'll just notice, again, I've mixed up the language a bit, but that's essentially exactly what I've said. In this essay, we will demonstrate how Pittman addresses the themes of losing innocence and being seen as a failure within his text through the use of techniques such as metaphor and personification. Okay, my goal here is, from here, the reader goes on to my first paragraph, which is about losing innocence through the use of metaphor. Okay, so I've really directed them in what to expect in my writing. Okay, even if they just read my introduction, they'd still have a pretty good idea about what I'm going to say. All right, and that's the function. So if I bring all of these things together, there's my introduction. Okay, 3 steps all come together, and that is a perfectly effective and acceptable introduction which outlines the purpose of my discussion.